My ex-wife cheated on me with my golden child brother and gave birth to his baby. Now my family, which always hated me, begs for money after I get promoted. For years my life seemed perfect on the surface: a loving wife, a stable job, and the dream of starting a family. My younger brother Ethan was the golden child, adored by our parents and praised for every accomplishment. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep, always falling short no matter what I did. Still, I accepted my role and tried to find solace in my marriage to Emily, the woman I believed would stand by me when the world didn't. It was one evening when I noticed a shift in Emily. She grew distant, her laughter hollow, her touch fleeting. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to work stress or the pressures of life. I should have seen the signs: the late-night phone calls, the sudden need to visit her parents. But I trusted her completely, blind to the reality unfolding around me. She was my anchor, my safe harbor, or so I thought. The day I discovered the truth shattered everything. A careless text left on her phone, a message from Ethan, exposed the affair. The words were simple, yet they burned. I can't wait to see our baby. Our baby? The world tilted. My brother, my wife, and now a child. In that moment, my reality crumbled, and I was left standing in the ruins of my life, betrayed by the two people I thought I could trust the most. The moment I read the text, the air felt suffocating, thick with betrayal. My heart pounded, but my mind grew eerily calm, as if I were outside my body, watching the scene unfold. I knew I had to confront her, but I needed clarity, not rage. I waited until she returned home, her face lighting up with that fake smile she wore so well lately. I sat at the dining table, the phone placed in front of me like evidence in a courtroom. Her expression shifted the moment she saw it. A mask of guilt replaced her usual confidence, and the color drained from her face. "Whose baby?" I asked, my voice trembling but controlled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. She admitted everything: the affair, the child, the lies. She tried to explain, to justify, but it was just noise. Every word felt like another stab in the back. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I simply got up, packed a bag, and walked out the door. The betrayal was too deep, too painful to process in that moment. I drove aimlessly for hours, tears blurring my vision, until I found myself parked by a lonely stretch of road. The realization hit me like a tidal wave: my marriage was over. My brother had stolen what little happiness I had, and the child I thought would be mine was his. The days after the revelation blurred together in a haze of pain and disbelief. I moved into a cheap, lifeless apartment, a stark contrast to the home Emily and I had built together. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages and calls from Emily, my parents, and Ethan. I ignored them all. I had nothing to say, and I couldn't bear to hear their voices. The betrayal had severed whatever thin threads of connection remained between us. Eventually, the calls stopped, replaced by a final message from my mother: "We don't want this family torn apart. Please be the bigger person and forgive them, forgive them." The words stung. It wasn't just a plea, it was a command to let go of my pain for the sake of family unity. Ethan was still their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. To them, my pain was a mere inconvenience, an obstacle in their quest to preserve their image of a perfect family. I was officially the villain in their narrative: cold, unforgiving, and selfish. I knew the truth, though. They didn't care about me, they never did. Their loyalty lay with Ethan, and I was disposable. But something inside me hardened that day. If they wanted to side with the brother who destroyed my life, they could have him. I was done seeking their approval, done with their endless favoritism. I was on my own now, and that was exactly how it needed to be. In the weeks that followed, I buried myself in work. My job, once just a means to an end, became my lifeline. I poured my rage, heartbreak, and humiliation into every task, working late into the night, driven by the need to escape my thoughts. My boss noticed the change and, surprisingly, rewarded it. Promotions were whispered, recognition grew, and for the first time in years I felt a sliver of control returning to my life. Emily's betrayal had stripped me of everything familiar, but it also freed me from the constant weight of family expectations. I no longer cared about pleasing anyone but myself. The chains that bound me to their judgment were broken, and I realized I was finally living for myself. I attended industry events, networked with powerful people, and made moves that propelled me forward. With every success, the bitterness in my heart dulled just a little. One day during a quarterly meeting, I was offered a senior position with a hefty raise. I accepted without hesitation. That night, alone in my empty apartment, I stared at the offer letter and felt something I hadn't in months: pride. I wasn't the failure my family had always labeled me. I had built this success on my own without them. The satisfaction was sweet, but I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of my climb. Not long after my promotion, the inevitable happened. My phone rang, and to my surprise, it was my mother. For a moment I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. "Hello," I answered, my voice cool. There was a pause, and then her familiar tone, sweet, but with an undercurrent of expectation, filled the line. "We heard about your promotion," she said. "Congratulations. We're so proud." It was the first time I'd heard those words from her, and they felt as hollow as I expected. Then came the real reason for her call. She explained that Ethan's business had hit a rough patch, and with the baby on the way, they were struggling financially. She danced around the words for a while, but eventually the request came. "We were wondering if you could help out." Just until things stabilize, I almost laughed at the audacity. After all the pain they'd caused me, they now wanted my help? The irony was almost too much to bear. I let her words hang in the air for a long moment before responding. No, the silence on the other end was deafening. She stammered, tried to reason with me, but I ended the call before she could finish. For the first time, I felt the power shift. They had taken everything from me, and now they had the gall to come begging. I wasn't their safety net, not anymore. If they wanted to live with the consequences of their choices, I would let them. After my mother's call, the requests kept coming. My father tried next, his approach more direct. "You have the means now," he said, as if that justified everything. "We're family. Don't let resentment ruin that." His tone was gruff, full of entitlement, and it struck me how little had changed. In their eyes, I was still the backup plan, the lesser son expected to step up when their golden child faltered. I calmly reminded him of the past. "You chose Ethan every time," I said. "You never cared about my well-being, so why should I care about yours now?" He dismissed it, saying I was being petty, that I should rise above it. I felt nothing but disdain. My entire life I'd bent over backward for their approval, but now for the first time I stood my ground. I hung up before he could respond, the finality of it echoing in my small, quiet apartment. Surprisingly, I felt lighter. I expected guilt, maybe regret, but there was none. I was free of their manipulations, their twisted sense of family loyalty. My success was mine alone, and if they wanted to come crawling now, they could choke on their pride. I wasn't their scapegoat anymore, I was my own man. A week later, it was Ethan's turn. He showed up at my door unannounced, looking worn and desperate. Gone was the charming golden boy, in his place stood a man crumbling under the weight of his choices. I didn't let him inside. Instead, we stood in the hallway, the tension between us suffocating. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice strained. "I never meant for things to get this bad." He told me about his failing business, how the baby's arrival had upended everything. His perfect life was unraveling, and he needed my help. "I can't do this without you," he admitted, a plea in his eyes that once would have softened me. "But not anymore." "You did this to yourself," I said coldly. "You took everything from me, and now you want my help. Why would I ever do that?" He had no answer, only silence. I watched as the realization dawned on him I wasn't the same man he'd betrayed. I closed the door on him, shutting out his pleas and leaving him to deal with the mess he'd made. Ethan's visit marked a turning point. The family's desperation turned into bitterness. Word spread through relatives that I was being cruel and selfish. They painted me as the villain, twisting the narrative to suit their needs. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ethan and Emily were struggling, but I felt no sympathy. They made their choices. My parents began reaching out less often, their messages growing colder. One final email from my mother read, "We're disappointed in you. We thought you were better than this." The hypocrisy was laughable. They had spent years dismissing me, belittling me, and now they dared to play the moral high ground. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Their disappointment no longer had power over me. My success, my happiness, was no longer tied to their approval. I was finally free, and the family that had once loomed so large in my life had shrunk into nothing more than a distant memory. With my family's ties severed, I embraced my new life fully. Work flourished, and I used my newfound freedom to explore passions I'd long ignored. I took up hobbies, travel, writing, even volunteering at local charities. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living, unburdened by the ghosts of my past. People at work noticed the change. I was no longer the quiet, overworked employee. I was confident, driven, and ambitious. Invitations to social events rolled in, and I made genuine friendships, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give. Slowly, the scars left by my family's betrayal began to heal. One night, sitting on the balcony of my new, luxurious apartment, I looked out over the city and realized how far I'd come. I was no longer the man clinging to a broken past. I had built a life for myself, one that was vibrant and fulfilling. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Months later, I received an unexpected letter. It wasn't from my parents or Ethan, it was from Emily. She apologized, genuinely this time, acknowledging the pain she caused and admitting that she had been selfish and cruel. She asked for nothing in return, only hoping that I could one day find it in my heart to forgive her. I read the letter twice, emotions swirling. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but I realized that holding on to the hatred only chained me to the past. I didn't reply, but I let go of the bitterness. I didn't do it for her or Ethan, I did it for myself. I deserved peace, and clinging to resentment would only rob me of that. From that moment on, I truly let go. The betrayal that once defined me was no longer the center of my world. I had moved on, stronger and wiser. And as I folded the letter and tucked it away, I felt a profound sense of relief. The chapter of my life defined by pain had finally closed, and I was ready to embrace the future, free at last. With the past behind me, I allowed myself to dream again. At one of the charity events I attended, I met someone, Sophia. She was nothing like Emily. Her warmth was genuine, her laughter infectious, and most importantly, she had no hidden agendas. We struck up a conversation that flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something I thought I'd lost hope. Sophia and I started seeing each other regularly. She wasn't just a distraction, she was a reminder that life could be beautiful again. She had her own painful past, and we bonded over shared stories of betrayal and resilience. There were no games, no pretenses, just two people finding solace in each other's company. Slowly, I allowed my heart to open, cautiously but willingly. As our relationship deepened, I realized that my capacity to trust hadn't been destroyed, just wounded. With her, I found healing. She taught me that love wasn't always pain and sacrifice. Sometimes it was gentle healing and exactly what I needed to truly move forward. Despite cutting ties, I occasionally heard news about Ethan through mutual acquaintances. His business had failed completely, and with no financial safety net, he was forced to move back in with our parents. Emily's dream of a perfect life had crumbled along with him. They were now living a life of scarcity, far from the golden pedestal they once occupied. A part of me wondered if they were truly remorseful, or just bitter that life hadn't rewarded them as they'd hoped. Ethan, once the pride of the family, was now struggling to keep it all together. Yet I felt no triumph in their downfall, only a strange, hollow detachment. Their suffering wasn't my responsibility. They made their choices, and now they were paying the price. My parents, once smug in their favoritism, were now burdened with the son they'd put on a pedestal. I imagined their disappointment as they watched the golden child falter. It wasn't my revenge, it was simply the universe balancing the scales. Sophia and I continued to grow closer, and for the first time I felt ready to introduce someone new into my life fully. She wasn't just a partner, she became my confidant, my equal. But the ghosts of my past haunted me, and one night I confessed everything to her: the betrayal, the heartbreak, and my family's cruelty. To my surprise, she didn't pity me. Instead, she admired my strength. "You've been through hell," she said, "but you didn't let it break you." That's what matters. Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. She didn't see me as a victim but as someone who had survived and thrived. And that's when I realized I truly loved her. In opening up to Sophia, I found freedom. I wasn't defined by my pain anymore. I was a man who had loved, lost, and found love again. And for the first time I saw a future that wasn't clouded by the shadows of betrayal but illuminated by hope. One afternoon, while walking with Sophia, I ran into Ethan by chance. He looked gaunt, weary, a shell of the man he used to be. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me with hollow eyes. Finally, he broke the silence. "I lost everything," he said quietly. "I don't know what to do." I looked at him, expecting to feel anger or satisfaction, but there was only pity. "You'll figure it out," I replied, my voice devoid of malice. Just like I had to, there was no need for revenge. Life had already delivered its lessons. Ethan didn't argue or beg. He nodded, defeated, and walked away. It was the last time I saw him. That encounter left me surprisingly at peace. I had no desire to kick him while he was down. The past no longer had any hold on me. I was free, and seeing Ethan like that only solidified my decision to move forward with grace, not bitterness. The wedding was simple, just as we wanted it. No grand spectacle, no elaborate guest list, just the people who truly mattered. Sophia wore a soft, flowing dress, her eyes glowing with happiness as we exchanged vows. Standing there, holding her hands, I realized how far I had come. This was love, pure and unburdened by the past. There were no ghosts at our wedding, only the promise of a bright future. Our friends, who had become my family, toasted us with warmth and genuine affection. For the first time, I felt surrounded by people who saw me for who I truly was, not the scapegoat or the failure my family had painted me to be. As Sophia and I danced under the stars, I whispered my gratitude to her. She had given me more than love, she had given me peace. That night I didn't think of Ethan, Emily, or my parents. They no longer haunted me. All that mattered was the life I was building with Sophia. And as we fell asleep in each other's arms, I felt a quiet joy I hadn't known in years. With my career flourishing, I found myself in a position to give back. I started mentoring younger colleagues, many of whom struggled with personal challenges of their own. I shared my stories sparingly, only when it felt right, but the lessons of resilience and self-worth resonated with them. Helping others heal became a new source of purpose for me. At first I didn't think much of it, but one day a young intern named Max approached me with tears in his eyes. "You changed my life," he said. "I thought I was stuck, but you showed me I could move forward." His words humbled me. I wasn't just building my own future anymore, I was helping others find theirs. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about transforming it into something meaningful. I realized that the pain I had endured wasn't wasted. It had shaped me into someone who could guide others out of their own darkness. And that, more than any professional achievement, became my greatest success. Months after my wedding, my parents reached out one last time. It was a letter from my mother, the tone surprisingly subdued. She acknowledged the hurt they had caused, though she didn't fully apologize. Instead, she asked for peace. "We're getting older," she wrote, "and we don't want to leave this world with bitterness between us." I stared at the letter for a long time, unsure of how to feel. There was no anger, no desire for revenge, but I also felt no need to reconcile. I realized that forgiveness didn't have to mean rekindling old ties. I could let go without inviting them back into my life. I sent a brief response. "I wish you peace," I wrote. That was all. No anger, no further explanation. It was enough for me, and perhaps it would be enough for them too. Ethan faded from my life entirely, though I occasionally heard whispers about him through distant relatives. His business never recovered, and neither did his relationship with Emily. They were no longer the golden couple, and the family's pride in him had withered away. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he regretted what he had done. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. His fate was no longer my concern. I had spent too many years trapped in the web of his betrayal, and I refused to let it define me any longer. One day I realized I hadn't thought about him in months. It felt like shedding a heavy coat I had worn for too long. I was free. And that freedom tasted sweeter than any revenge ever could. Sophia and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Lily. From the moment she was born, I knew my life had changed forever. She was perfect, with Sophia's warm smile and a laugh that filled the room with light. Holding her in my arms, I felt a surge of love so overwhelming it brought tears to my eyes. I promised myself I would be the father I never had present, supportive and loving. I would never make Lily feel like she was second best or unworthy of love. Every moment with her was a gift, and I cherished it fully. Watching her grow, I realized that she was the ultimate testament to my journey. She was born not from the ashes of betrayal, but from the love and hope I had rebuilt with Sophia. She was the proof that life, even after unimaginable pain, could be beautiful again. Life settled into a joyful rhythm. Work thrived, my relationship with Sophia deepened, and Lily grew into a curious, spirited child who filled our home with laughter. I no longer looked back with regret or anger. The past was a distant memory, one that had shaped me but no longer defined me. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching Lily play in the yard, Sophia joined me. "You've come so far," she said, taking my hand. "Do you ever think about them anymore?" I considered her question and smiled softly. "Not really," I admitted. "They're part of my story, but they're not the whole story." And that was the truth. I had moved beyond the pain, the betrayal, and the longing for approval. I had built a life filled with love, purpose, and peace. And as I watched my daughter chase fireflies, I knew that the best chapters of my life were still ahead of me. A year after Lily's birth, I received an unexpected letter, this time from Emily. It was brief but sincere. She expressed her regret for the pain she had caused, apologized for her actions, and admitted how much she had hurt me and the rest of the family. There were no excuses, just a raw and vulnerable admission of guilt. Reading her words, I felt nothing but a quiet sense of closure. I hadn't expected it, Nor did I need it. I was in a place where her apology didn't weigh on me anymore. I had already forgiven her, not for her sake but for my own peace of mind. Holding on to resentment would have only hurt me, but letting go had given me freedom. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't need to. I had moved on, and in a way I could thank her for helping me find the strength to build the life I had. She had been a chapter, but now it was time for me to keep writing my own story. Over time, my experiences began to take shape in my mind as something more than just personal healing. They became a source of inspiration. I started writing a book about overcoming betrayal, finding strength in adversity, and the power of self-worth. At first it was just a way for me to process everything, but soon it grew into something much more meaningful. The book became a modest success. It resonated with people who had faced similar challenges: heartbreak, family betrayal, and the struggle to reclaim one's life. Letters poured in from readers who shared their stories, thanking me for showing them that they weren't alone. The book didn't just heal me, it helped others heal too. What started as a cathartic journey for me became my legacy, proof that even the deepest wounds can lead to something beautiful. I was no longer just the victim of betrayal, I was the author of my own redemption. As the years passed, Sophia and I continued to build a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. We traveled to places we had always dreamed of, experiencing different cultures, tasting new foods, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. Our daughter Lily grew up surrounded by love, laughter, and the kind of stability that I had longed for as a child. One trip that stood out was our visit to Greece. We walked through ancient ruins, took boat rides in the Mediterranean, and spent long evenings watching the sunset together. It was during that trip that I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the broken man clinging to the past. I was someone who had found peace, joy, and purpose. Traveling the world wasn't just about seeing new places, it was about embracing the freedom I had fought so hard to achieve. Each new experience was a reminder of how much I had grown, how far I had come, and how much more there was to see. When my parents passed away, it was a quiet affair. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic goodbyes. They had been absent from my life for so long that their passing didn't bring the flood of emotions I might have expected. I had already mourned the loss of our relationship years ago, and now there was only a sense of finality. I attended their funeral, but not out of obligation. I went because I had to, because closure, even in the form of a simple goodbye, was part of my journey. I stood by the gravesite, surrounded by distant relatives who hadn't been part of my life for years, and realized something profound. I had finally let go of the past. I was no longer the son they had rejected. I was a man who had built his own life, and no one could take that away from me. In the years that followed, my life continued to unfold with purpose. Sophia and I raised Lily, teaching her the values of kindness, integrity, and strength. We watched her grow into a thoughtful, compassionate young woman, and I couldn't help but marvel at how different her childhood was from mine. My work continued to thrive, and I found new ways to give back to my community. The mentorship programs I had started expanded, helping countless others rise above their circumstances. I wasn't just living for myself anymore, I was living for the future. Looking back, I realized that my greatest victory wasn't in professional success, or even personal triumph, it was in the way I had chosen to live. I had broken free from the toxic patterns of my past, built a life full of love and peace, and created a legacy I could be proud of. As I watched Lily graduate from college, I saw a reflection of everything I had worked for, a life not defined by betrayal, but by the love and strength I had fought so hard to find. And as I stood there, watching her take her next steps, I knew that my story wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.